you hammer home the importance of being on time to the whole team, but then you never follow up with that one person who's late all the time to tell them that you've noticed they're late and they need to start showing up on time. That's not the same as having that direct conversation, right? That's a very remedial thing, I guess, or entry level issue, but you'd be surprised how many people actually try to beat around the bush of giving real feedback and having real candid conversations.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a good one. Our guest is the founder of People Principles, which provides hiring and people strategies for startups. Jackie Koch, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
It's great to have you. Jackie, you help people bring great people into organizations, and I think it doesn't get any less valuable. It's only getting more valuable to find talent, in my opinion. And I'm sure my listener right now feels the same way in the accounting industry, particularly the bookkeeping industry. Finding great people to work in your firm is always getting more challenging. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and your career leading up to this point, and then we'll get into talking about your expertise.
Totally. You're right. Accounting is becoming harder and harder to find people for. Although I feel like there's always been industries that have been that way, right? Where it goes in ebbs and flows on, you can find people, you can't, but accounting is definitely a challenging, industry to find folks for. So we can totally dig into that. But I've been in recruiting. I'm one of those weirdos that is still doing what they went to school for forever ago.
Wow.
So I went to school, graduated with a degree in business and a minor in HR, actually, and started my career in recruiting. And I did that for a temporary staffing agency for about 5 years, and ended up transitioning out into more of a generalist role for HR. I wanted to expand to more than just recruiting, even though I really liked it. And found my way from living in Minnesota. So we probably have a kindred spirit. Being a Canadian, I feel like being from Minnesota, I always love Canadians, but moved from Minnesota, found my way to LA. And when I was living in Los Angeles, I started working in the startup community and being one of the first, recruiting or HR hires in a business, and really building a business from the ground up. And I had an MBA at this point, but I gotta say, I've learned so much more about what it actually takes to set up the right foundation for HR and having people in your business, and then going out and finding them through building a business. You learn a lot of theory in MBA programs, but you learn a lot about doing when you're actually doing the thing. And so I decided, after joining 3 different startups in-house, 2 of them, they waited way too long to bring in people who, an expert in HR. And so I spent a lot of time cleaning up messes that frankly were pretty simple mistakes that turned into big problems, because they just didn't have anybody guiding them with the right knowledge. And then my last company, I joined really early. I was employee number 20, and we didn't run into any of those mistakes that I had spent so much time cleaning up. And it was a moment where, I decided to step away from full-time work and do, consulting work so that I could help some of these small business owners get this stuff right early and avoid a lot of the pain that I had to go through. And so I've been doing fractional recruiting and fractional HR work for the last 4 years, with a lot of small businesses and startups as well. And it's been so fun learning all of the different types of industries, and being able to plug into a bunch of different types of businesses and industries has been really, really fun and challenging all at the same time.
Wow, very cool. I'm curious with the what were some of the big mistakes that they were making at that first startup?
Yeah. So they were, I'm going to actually say multiple companies that I worked with kind of made these mistakes. And the first really are misclassification mistakes. And what I mean by that is, classifying people, or I'm going to say workers, as contractors when they actually should have been employees,
Mhm,
or classifying employees as salary exempt, meaning they don't get overtime, when they actually should have been hourly non-exempt employees who are eligible for overtime and some other things. Um, you don't really, a lot of times business owners don't give that as much thought as they really should.
mhm,
A lot of times it's because they don't know. They talk to their friend who's like, oh, I'm just hiring everyone as a contractor. You can do that. So they do that. Or it's easier for me to just pay somebody a salary than make them track hours and do all of these things. So I'm just going to pay them a salary. And they don't understand the implications of doing that until it's often too late. So I would
mhm,
say misclassification is definitely one of the biggest mistakes that we ran into. And then as a result of that, we ran into wage and hour claims and wage and hour issues where, because they didn't classify people correctly as a hourly employee who was eligible for overtime, they weren't tracking hours appropriately, they weren't paying overtime appropriately, which just like cascaded into this really long lawsuit that was really expensive, just because of some unintentional or unknown mistakes. So those were the two biggest things.
wow. Those it can be very innocent beginnings that lead to really severe consequences.
And what usually happens, yeah, I mean, you're spot on. And it's it's usually not intentional. And it's usually because that stuff, business owners don't want to deal with that stuff really, right? It's not the
Mhm,
sexy stuff. It's not the marketing stuff. It's not the stuff that's really going to grow the business. And so they think, oh, I'll deal with it when, and they like punt it. And they think all of a sudden this magic moment arrives where, okay, I'm ready to now do this right, and that never happens. Usually what that moment is like, oh, you get a lot, like a legal notice in the mail, or something happens where you're like, oh crap, I should have been paying attention to this. Or they pass it off to somebody else on their team because they think it's just administrative work. So they're like, oh, my administrative assistant can handle this. Or, somebody operational on the team who does the best they can, but it's confusing stuff to try to go out and research on your own. Or they pass it off to a bookkeeper or an accountant. And you guys are amazing and you know so many things, but you're not often trained in HR stuff. Like, that'd be like asking me how to do books. And I'm like, or how to set up payroll taxes. Like, I'm not an expert in that, right? And so they think they're passing it off to the right person, or that it's simple. So they pass it off, and they don't realize. They don't realize the implications of that stuff.
Accountants and bookkeepers trust Payworks to get it right. Why? Well, the math just adds up. Friendly, expert-level service plus a surprisingly affordable Canadian-built payroll platform equals reliable results and a strong foundation for success. You can count on Payworks the way your clients count on you. In fact, more than 98% of clients who choose Payworks choose to stay. There are plenty more reasons why Payworks is right for you. Visit payworks.ca today.
that's right. It's one. I think I was going to say before you mentioned it, kindred spirits. I think with the bookkeepers, because owners, right? The bookkeeping on an admin person can do it. It's like it just all sort of goes in from the bank into our software and all magically just gets done. And those are the stories you hear about from our listener, where they run into massive problems having it all set up incorrectly. And I think you're bang on. Business owners, they don't understand it, so how would they know the implications and the severity and, the reason why they would want to hire an expert. But when they do, and it gets set up correctly, then things are done. I mean, it's like you've said, you've outlined some of these mistakes. I would say most don't understand it. And really, even if it's not sexy or if it's not, they just don't understand it. They don't know. It takes an expert. It takes a bookkeeper as an expert, an accountant is an expert, a person like yourself working as a fractional HR person is an expert to help them do it correctly. And small businesses often just put those sorts of things off, don't understand that an expert really is needed. They don't understand the value yet of hiring often an expert to do it. But the cost is much greater in the long run.
It really is. And also there's not a lot of access. It's hard to find access to like an HR person to support a small business. You could go on to Upwork and Google HR consultant or something like that. But sometimes I feel like there's a lot of bookkeeping firms for all different types of businesses or accounting firms for all different stages of businesses. But there isn't as many HR companies that I feel like exist. So it's hard to find them. I think also a lot of small business owners often have never worked, I shouldn't say never, but often I see at least that a lot of times people who start a business often haven't worked in like a traditional corporate situation.
That's right.
So they haven't ever really worked. They know the word HR, but they think like Toby from The Office. Like they don't actually know what HR means or what it does. And so it just stays in this like black area or like this gray area. And so that's why, I also have a podcast to try to educate on some of these things in a way that isn't so scary and is a little bit more approachable, because I just think there's like a lack of resources available. And especially if you haven't worked in a big company, you don't even really understand what HR can actually do for your business.
You bet. It's one of those, I don't know. It's the I don't know part of the pie. You know what you know what you don't know, but what you don't know. That's the very, very big pie. And HR specialists would fall into that category for sure. Some of the bookkeeping would as well. Part of it's like, I know I need to have certain things set up correctly, but even in this podcast, identifying some of those mistakes would be very educational to a business owner to go, ooh, I don't want to do that. And yes, I'm doing it that way. Oh, I got to fix that. I got to change that. And that's great. Your podcast, what is the name of your podcast?
It's World's Greatest Boss.
World's Greatest Boss. That's wonderful.
Thanks. We teach, I think there's three main things that are super important for running a business. One is knowing how to be a great leader and a great manager of people, right? Because both of those have to be together. There's learning how to hire the right people into your business and how to build a team. And then there's knowing how to follow the rules and stay out of trouble. Like you really have to know all three of those things, I think, to be a really great boss. And so that's really what I try to cover on the show and in the stuff that I talk about, because I think people initially think the only thing they need to do is hire. So they run out and they hire because everyone says, hire a team, do all this stuff. And they just think all of those other things fall into place. And they don't give it any thought. And so that's really what my goal is, to like educate on more than just hire the right people, because it's important and knowing how to hire is important. But if you don't know how to do the other things, you're just going to be spinning your wheels, hiring the wrong people, getting into trouble, all of those things, which I'm sure you've seen or have seen clients do for sure.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I think it's great. It's probably a great podcast for our listener to listen to, because many of them are bosses and have to hire staff. And so who wouldn't want to be the world's greatest boss?
We're always trying. It's a never ending voyage, right?
That's right. It's a journey. That's right. It's not 100%. A destination. It's a journey. So let's maybe talk a little bit about that. We've talked about some of the mistakes, and those are big ones. And I think it's great because also bookkeepers would be very close to the issues that are happening in a business around people, right? People need to get paid. They're going to know that there's, definitely there's, I'm sure you've worked closely with the finance side of the business. Those all need to work together. So the more they know, the more they can assist their small business owner in making the right choices when they're hiring someone to help them deal with some of these things. And many of them do some of the parts of what you've said as well. So learning more and being educated on that to do it, to make sure that it's done right and when to bring in the correct people is very valuable. Let's talk about, you've mentioned in a podcast, actually it was a clip on YouTube, hire slow, fire fast. Now I've heard that before, but I'd love to get your take on it. And it's probably couldn't be said enough and talked about enough. So please, let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I would love to. I feel like it's something, I go to a lot of business events and like, hire before you're ready, hire fast, or hire slow, fire fast. Like you get all of these like buzzwords. And I think it's good advice if you know what it means. And so first I'm going to talk about what hiring, maybe I'll start with like what hiring slow is not. Maybe we'll start there. Or what I think people think hiring slow is putting a job posting out there, waiting until they've spoken to some arbitrary amount of people to make sure they've properly assessed all of the talent pool, and they know they're like comparing everybody against what's available, right? And they're like, well, I've spoken to 10 different people. I think Joe's the best of what we're going to get, right? And so they like drag it out, or like they'll interview somebody pretty early on in the process and love them and really feel like they're a great fit. But then they're like, but I haven't talked to any more people. Who else is out there? So they like drag their feet trying to talk to more people to validate a decision they already kind of know. And then all of a sudden Joe's found another job. And then they're like, God dang it. Like, why did I do that? And so they'll do that, or they'll wait until they get every single person's yes. So if anybody listening to the show has a team of people and you involve them in the hiring process, you think you need to get a hell yes from every single person on your team before you hire somebody. And that likely never happens, right? So then it just slows down the process. And so that's what I think people think hiring slow means. Or financially, waiting till 100% you're going to be able to keep this person on your team for the end of time. Like those are some of the things I think people think that means. Have you heard any of that? Like, is that stuff that you've heard when people talk about that?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, I like the question, what does it really mean? I've heard it. In my mind, it seems to mean a little bit of everything you've said, because I've done all of the above. And in my heart, I guess it means finding a person that is really going to be a great fit for them and a great fit for us. And it always tap into my intuitive side. Like, there's two sides. There's one side of me, and in sales, we used to call it the happy ears, right? Everything you hear is like this, they're going to buy this, right? They like it, they want it, and that's all you hear, happy ears. And the trying to separate those two and to be more critical and not judgmental, but objective. It's similar, very similar. I find them very similar in the sales organization to the hiring organization. It's very similar. You want the person to work out. You're like rooting for them. The people coming in, you're rooting for them, and that's can be the hire fast side. In my opinion, it's like, I don't know that this is a good fit for them. I don't know that I'm not feeling it. Like it's more intuitive or internal for me, anyways, personally. So
yeah.
I've rushed through it because that part of me gets pushed down, and it's like, but we really we've got this problem. And I mean, our listener for sure would be saying when they're hiring, it's usually they're so overwhelmed and drowning in stuff to do that now they've got to. So you can imagine it's like, oh, this person could rescue me from from the work that I have and the overwhelm that I have. And that's, I think, falls in the hire fast category, because they hire somebody that's absolutely not a right fit for them or themselves. I kind of got on about that, but that's my take.
Well, so I'm glad you brought that up, because what actually helps you hire fast, like if you are in the position of like, I desperately need help, like I'm so overwhelmed, this part that I'm going to tell you about is what you skip, but it will actually help you then hire fast. So hiring slow is actually getting really clear on what you need the person to do in your business and the core traits or values, people call it competencies. You can call it whatever buzzword you want, but what are some like non-negotiable things that every single person that comes into your company needs to have based on your business, based on your culture, and like finding 3 of those things. And then once you know what the person needs to do, what are the skills that they have to be successful to do the job, like to do the work, right? And most of the time, those skills can be trained. Now, in accounting and bookkeeping, like there's some stuff that like probably you need expertise and education on, but it's like getting very clear on what those things are that you're looking for, and then defining, okay, I know what they need to do. I know what the core traits are that I look for in people who come into my business. And I know the expertise that's needed to do this job well. Let me define what a great candidate would look like. So like, what type of experience do they have? What industries have they worked in? Like, how will I know, if I have these core qualities and characteristics that they have, that I want them to have, how will I know that they have them? Like, what things can I ask to get that information out? And then also define what a not good candidate is, so that then when you go into the interview process, you have that as your, barometer of what good looks like. And then you also want to map out what your hiring process is ahead of time. So who's going to be a part of that process? How many interviews are there going to be? And what are we asking in every interview, so that we make sure we're effectively assessing all of those things? And that work takes some time, and people don't want to do that. They're so overwhelmed. They just want to post the job. They just want to start talking to people. And then they assess based on who they talk to, not on what they actually want. And so once you define those things, you can easily get through people and then quickly make decisions and not lose people. So to me, that's what hiring slow is doing that upfront work to know what you're looking for, how you're going to find it, and like what good actually is. And nobody wants to do that.
That's right. And that would fall into your piece of the expertise, because having someone like yourself to guide them through that is important. If you have someone that, because essentially what you're building there is a hiring system.
Totally.
For a specific role. And we talk all the time about systems and process. And when you have a system, you're relying on the system versus on the human. And all the things that I said about what it means to me is, my intuition, all those things. That's not part of the system. It's a piece of the system. It's not the system. And so I absolutely love that, because once you get that, that's done. That's repeatable. It's scalable. And it's the hard part. It's the messy bits that have to get done, and with someone who knows typically what they're doing.
Totally. And then the second half of that is firing fast.
Yes,
right?
Let's talk about that, because that's one that I'm sure you get a lot of. That could mean anything.
Yeah. So usually people fire too slow. Well, I feel like there's 2 camps. There's, you make one mistake, you're terrible, you're gone, you're fired, right? So there are people who fire fast in that way, and that's not a good approach. Or you wait too long to start having the right conversations with people. They notice there's a performance problem, and they like think they talked to the person about it because they hinted at it, right? They're like, well, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, this is a very easy example, but like, let's say you have an employee who's always showing up late, right? And you're like super irritated by it. And so you have a team meeting and you're like, you hammer home the importance of being on time to the whole team, but then you never follow up with that one person who's late all the time to tell them that you've noticed they're late and they need to start showing up on time. That's not the same as being like, hey, Michael, you keep showing up late to work. Like, we talked last week to the team about being on time and you're not being on, like, you keep consistently showing up late. Having that direct conversation, right? That's a very remedial thing, I guess, or entry level issue, but you'd be surprised how many people actually try to beat around the bush of giving real feedback and having real candid conversations. And so what firing fast is like, as soon as you identify that somebody's having a performance concern, you have a direct conversation with them about it. And you're like, hey, I've noticed that whatever, is going on, you say, and you're like, I really need you to start doing, and then you tell them what you need them to start doing instead. And you work with them to get a commitment from them that they're going to start improving their performance. And so you have that conversation first. And then you keep paying attention for like the next 30 days, right? And this is the hard part, is like, you get so busy, you have team members and you talk to them, and then all of a sudden 45 days have passed, they're still not improving, and you realize you haven't checked in on them again. And so you almost like want to put a reminder on your calendar. You don't have to put a meeting on theirs, but something so that you remember to come back and like, hey, has Sally actually been doing what we said that she needed to do? And if at that time Sally isn't, then you schedule another time to follow up with her again and clearly outline it again, and clearly outline what needs to improve in like the next 30 days for you not to have a harder conversation. And then if after 30 days things are improving, great. Check in, tell her things are improving. Or if they're not, at that moment, you can decide, well, has any progress been made? Should I give her another 30 days to improve? Or if maybe it hasn't, then that's when you're like, hey, Sally, we talked about this and these things are still not improving. And then that's when you have the termination conversation, or the conversation of like, do you even like really want this job? Like, you have another conversation with them. And so it's, it's usually a 60-day process. But the fast starts when, as soon as you notice there's a performance conversation, you're actually addressing it with that person and not just putting it off, hoping that it improves on its own.
Very good. Very good. And that speaks as well, some of the things that you've said. Systems, right? If has the person been told like it's not acceptable to be late, or it's not acceptable to do whatever it is? If it's not documented, if it's not been told, that makes it harder for someone to follow the rules. And often in a business without any systems or process or documentation, people are just doing it the way someone told them. It's like the campfire business, right? It's like we learn through coming to the campfire and talking about the past and all that good stuff. That's where it gets into real challenging conversations, because where is the policy on that? You didn't tell me that I shouldn't arrive 5 minutes. Like, what's the big deal about 5 minutes, right?
Right.
So that leads to, and you can really see how the without the one, it's hard to do the other, and maybe that would have never been a problem had they known that they didn't want to be in.
And I'm glad you brought up the documentation piece, because I do think that's what scares a lot of business owners the most. They like think they need to have this formal write-up process or this formal process for documenting performance. And it literally can be as simple, and it should be as simple. This also feels like a normal human relationship, that you sit down with your team members and you have the conversation, and then you send an email after the conversation and you're like, hey, Sally, thank you. Like, I'm really glad we had a chance to talk today. I just wanted to recap so that you and I are on the same page. This is what we talked about. This is what you said you're going to do. And I'm going to follow up with you again at this time. And it can be as simple as an email to her. It doesn't have to be some like Word document that you print off and they sign, but an email recapping a conversation. Also, like when somebody gets something in writing, it's like, oh, like they were serious. Like I really do have to take this seriously. And it also is like very normal for you just to like follow up from meetings, hopefully with emails, recapping things. So it doesn't seem like they're in a lot of trouble, right? But it's also like being very explicit about this is what we talked about. And I want to make sure you know that we are on the same page. And so if you just got into the habit of sending emails, like recapping every one-on-one you have with your team, it seems like a lot, but it would be, once you get into that habit, it's the easiest way to have performance conversations.
There's really no way of getting around that.
No.
People
And
need to have, they need to know what the points are, right? If, 30-minute meeting could have 7 different takeaways.
Right. And now like with Zoom having like meeting summaries and stuff, it's so easy. Like you can just send it.
Yeah. Yes, it does all the work for you.
Exactly.
So there's really no excuse. Cool thing too is when people start to say fire, it means that the person's a bad person or that they're not the right fit or whatever. And often it's not. It's actually a wasted opportunity for correcting the behavior and having a person flourish inside the organization. And that's when it's done correctly. You have more opportunity that the person goes, yeah, you know what? Okay, I get it. I got to come in on time. Thanks for holding me accountable on this.
Totally.
And they feel more committed to the role, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's probably several stories that you have of people just doing something very simple, like having a process around if someone's not doing something, we notice it, we talk about it, we document it, it gets corrected. And if it continues to move on, then they move on and you help them find a better place and you find someone better to come work for you. I'm sure that's the way it probably goes versus we don't have anything documented. You came late, you're not committed. Let's get rid of this person. They get into a sort of they get the bad rap from something very small that could be corrected versus looking at what's working and where their strengths are.
Yeah. I mean, I have so many stories of that. I would say, I wish I had well, this sounds morbid, I guess, but whatever, I'm going to say it. Like, I would say a lot of times when I've had to fire people, I end up getting hugs because like, they're not surprised. Like they know. And like, we've been working on it together and like, it can be a situation where you both come to the realization that it's not the right fit. And like, that's okay. I can support you in finding a new job. Like, there's ways to have those conversations, not be so confrontational if you're willing to hold someone to high standards and have the conversations, and be approachable and very just candid. Like it doesn't have to be as scary, I think, as people make it seem.
That's right. And it can be very positive for everyone, right? The business gets to find someone that is a better fit and wants to be a fit there and all that good stuff. And the person who's leaving goes through another open door. And that often in my career, the people that I've seen let go, so I used to work in the corporate world. Whenever I heard people getting let go, I always said, congratulations. Because I always knew it will open. It's like they probably got to a place in their life or their career where it was not doing it for them. And that's why their performance went sideways. But where'd they go? They went and they found something new that lit them up and they've all done very well. And so it's an opportunity. People put so much, and it's not a good, so everybody that I've said to reacts differently, but most are, get a chuckle or whatever. But I tell them, I'm serious. It's a hard time for someone being let go, can be. They give you a hug because you're transitioning them in a very human way. Those people have probably done very well wherever they've gone to. And so that's the thing. It's like we're just, these are just stops on the journey of life at these different companies. Yeah. And I think maybe part of the world's greatest boss, that's part of it, is like we're here to develop people here and develop them for the next role or the next place that they'll be. I think that's a more human way of looking at it.
Yeah, I would agree. Amen to that.
Yes. But it's lots of stuff, and it gets, there's situations, all different types of situations. But if we start with that in mind, I'm sure it helps.
I mean, you're going to have bad time experiences with it too, but
Yes.
it's as long as you can know you did everything in your power to make it go as good as it could, then that's all you can do.
That's right. So tell us a little bit about your organization and some resources. I'm sure there's many that are listening right now thinking, yeah, that sounds interesting. I need to do a better job of that. We have your podcast, The World's Greatest Boss. Is that .com, worldsgreatestboss.com? What's the link to
It's
the podcast?
.co. Everything's .co.
.co. Great. So the worldsgreatestboss.co. What other resources or recommendations can you make to our listener?
Absolutely. So my business is called People Principles, and it's peopleprinciples.co. And we actually have a free compliance checklist. Now, this is geared for if you are in the US predominantly, because of course laws are different between Canada and the US. Now, there's probably some similarities, but we have a free compliance checklist that you can go and get a copy of that will walk you through the most important things to make sure you have right in your business. And I think for bookkeepers listening to the show, it walks you through a lot of stuff that business owners will probably want you or expect you to know. So it could be a great resource for bookkeepers as well. Walks them through how to figure out their classifications, minimum wage laws, all of the stuff that comes into that. And that's totally free. So they can go to peopleprinciples.co/checklist and get a copy of that. That's a great place to start.
Beautiful.
And I think we'll definitely set them up to at least know what they don't know and be able to effectively determine the amount of risk they're willing to take in their business, because that's essentially, I'm assuming, kind of similar to how you all support, is like, my job is to help you understand your risks and mitigate them as much as possible, but there's going to be risks whenever you have team members. So that's where I would direct folks to. And then, of course, the podcast has a lot of episodes on specific topics around compliance and hiring as well. So it can always be a resource there.
That's very good. That's exciting. Well, this has been delightful, Jackie. It's been great to get to know you, and thank you for sharing your expertise today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And hopefully this will help bookkeepers partner better with their HR folks too, because you do have to become a unit, a unit when you're supporting different folks in the business. So thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. And on that note, yes, definitely. I think one of the great benefits of this is we now have some great bookkeepers that know a person who can help them when they see this happening inside organizations and refer you in to help, which is great.
Thank you.
And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.